We're approaching from the left.
Those weeks at gunnery school are flashing through his mind.
Okay, Pee-wee's all yours.
First mission. You get him, Pee-wee?
Well, that ain't no clay pigeon burner.
Only a few weeks in the Pacific, and Pee-wee and his brother gunners of the crew had a lot of notches in their belts. Notches for annihilating Nipponese planes. And then, one dawn, July 15th, the crew took off on a bombing mission. A particular mission of strategic importance.
All the gunners were called in one day, and in this meeting, this man in a very dramatic way looked at us and he said, "You're dead. You are dead. You're dead. You are going to die. Just consider yourselves dead. And if you feel that you're dead and forget the fact that you're going to have some life in the future, it'll be helpful to you. Just relax and know you're already dead." And it sounds terrible to say now. It was terrible at the time to hear that, but it worked. Something happens to you, I think, one day you're 17 years old and you're turning 18 years old, and maybe you're trying to con your mother a little bit into making her think that you've learned some manners and that you've grown up proper and you've listened to your mom and dad, and the next day you're a killer. And if anyone thinks that doesn't have an impact on a person, they're just kidding themselves, because it has a hell of an impact. It has a big impact. It affects your life. And it goes deep, and it goes into places that are hard to manage. And the feelings that you get at times when you start thinking back on your experience, hard to manage. It's hard to manage. I think the difficulty a lot of us had getting back home was trying to reorient ourselves into a culture, into a society. With the language, for one thing, was pretty bad in the military. We joke about it, we can laugh about it, but it was pretty bad, it was pretty tough. And all of a sudden you're back into a society where killing was the most important thing. Trying to be a nice guy was more important than the killing and learning how to kill. You're trying to learn how to live and try to learn how to be a citizen again. There's a transition there that comes about that we don't talk about a lot. But it's there and it's tough. And for some people, it's not manageable. I should tell you that what happened, we had this horrible typhoon that was probably the most powerful typhoon in history in that part of the world. And it destroyed everything in its path, and Okinawa was in its path. And after that storm, it destroyed pretty much everything, including for the first time that I ever saw, the organization of the military was pretty well destroyed. We were told to get off of the island, and of course, being in the Air Force, it was to go back to Hickam Field. And there were a handful of bombers that they said had been checked and not destroyed that we could ride in, so I hitched a ride on a B-24. I don't know the crew, I didn't know any of the people on the ship, but I jumped on with some other guys and we took off, and about 5 hours out after refueling, we lost an engine, an outboard engine on the right, and we of course began to lose altitude when we lost a left inboard engine. So we're flying a B-24 full of guys on 2 engines, and we're losing altitude pretty fast. There was no longer ships. The Navy no longer was alternating to pick up flyers because the war was over. So we were in trouble and we were going down and knew that there was no hope. So we were lost, and when the navigator told us that he had discovered on the map a speck that was called Johnson Island. He said, I think it's a coral reef, and if we can get near there, maybe, maybe somebody can survive the crash. We kept going, hoping that maybe we'd get close enough. Believe it or not, we made it. We're flying down over the water for some period of time, very close to hitting the water when he hit that white coral beach. I'll never forget that look of that white coral. It's an interesting story because it was a sub-refueling base, and they had PBYs that patrolled for Japanese submarines, and they had engines in stock. Well, it turns out Continental built the PBY and Continental built the B-24 bomber. So we had an engine, we repaired one engine and we replaced the other engine. It took us a while and we all worked hard at that, but one of the men there on the naval personnel there was an engineer, and he was sharp, and we were able to get that plane flying, and we got off of that Johnson Island and got back to Hickam Field. And when we got there, the pilot said he's going to refuel, you can all get off, and where we're assigned, and told us where we were to go. And he said, no, I'm staying on the plane, I'm going to refuel and fly to San Francisco. And not a single man got off of that airplane, not a single one. We all flew on, got to San Francisco, and I got on the train and headed back to Columbus. And I think the prayers that I offered were answered. And when the prayers were answered there over the Pacific, when we went down on that island, I felt an obligation, and I made promises to God. And when I landed in San Francisco, somehow I immediately forgot all those promises. And I think things were going along quite nice for me when, without going into a description, I was reminded one night, we'll say, that I had not kept my promise. And so I had gone to Gethsemane on a retreat, and during that retreat at Gethsemane, I realized that my calling was a spiritual calling. And one of the priests at Gethsemane recommended that I apply to the Shalem Institute for training, and I did that, was immediately accepted, and went through a 2-year program of training as a spiritual director, a spiritual advisor. I decided I needed to branch out a little bit to get back where I could be working with veterans. I felt a need. I could see at that time, it became knowledge that an awful lot of veterans were suffering from PTSD, and maybe there could be some help. So I started working with these guys that would be referred to me, that came in as veterans. And that was the beginning of my work with the veterans who were suffering at that time. And that went on for about 22 years,